Hi everyone, it's Nicole Spohr here today with some faux watercolor background cards created with markers. So we are going to be taking the Simon Says stamp Peony Background and coloring it in with some Tombow dual brush markers, spritzing with water, and then stamping on watercolor cardstock. It's going to give you a kind of watercolor effect without actually watercoloring. These are also a fantastic way to add that detail to a stamp, whatever kind of stamp that might be that has a solid stamp like this, where you might want to color all of those different areas a different color and not have them be one solid color. So this definitely gives you that definition in color. I'm going to be creating two different examples today, one from start to finish, and then the other I will just share the coloring part mostly of that one to save a little time. I've got the Simon Says stamp Peony Bouquet background here in my Misty, and I am coloring in, as I mentioned, with some of the Tombow dual brush pens. The colors I'm using today are hot pink and rubine red for the peony flowers, for the pink flowers here. Then I'm going to spritz with a little water and press into my Misty. The greenery is going to be the colors chartreuse and willow green. And you can see I am simply coloring on that stamp just as I would if I was coloring in an image. So kind of going all over the image with my light color, which is going to be the hot pink, and then adding detail with the rubine red, spritzing with water from a sprayer. And I am using a mini mister because it gives a really fine mist. You could also huff on the stamp if you want to add hot breath to it to reactivate the ink before pressing. I find though, if you want that watercolor effect, you're going to have to add water. A note of caution: if you add too much water to the image when you spritz it, it's going to run and muddle and you're going to lose definition. Same goes if you don't add enough. You're not going to get a very good stamped impression. So I have left that in the video here where I've not got a great impression. So actually what I ended up doing was reactivating the ink color that is still on the stamp with another spritz of mist, probably holding 10 to 12 inches away, and then pressing it again to get a little bit more color on my cardstock. I am using a watercolor cardstock for the background. It is going to be thicker, it's heavyweight, it's made to work with water, thus it's just really going to work much better when you're adding this amount of water to a project, because it really is quite a bit of water. You can see when I spritz that with water, it's quite a bit. I actually reactivated that stamp a couple times. For whatever reason, that big flower there gave me fits when coloring in. I'm working in little areas. This is a pretty big background stamp. I find that it's much easier to kind of go flower by flower or just section by section, however you want to do it. I do clean off my stamp. I didn't full on clean it, but I did wipe it dry with a microfiber cloth in between stamping, so I'm not adding extra water to my cardstock over and over. I want to make sure that I'm starting with a fairly clean surface each time. If there are any little areas that you feel like don't have enough ink, remember you can always color it again, reactivate it with a little water, and press it back into that cardstock. I have my cardstock in a Misty so that I can do this as many times as I need to and not have to worry that my cardstock is going to move and shift around and I'm going to kind of lose that definition for the flower. The center part of each of my flowers is process yellow. I'm simply using, I don't have the full range of these dual brush markers, but I just kind of try to use an assortment of what I do have, and I find that I'm usually able to achieve whatever I need to with the ones I do have. I really like these. I sometimes kind of forget about them. They are one of my very favorite tools for going direct stamp to paper when you want to color on a stamp. Now, once I finish the background, it's completely dry. That's really key here. I actually let it sit and completely air dry, came back to it a little bit later. I am going to put the UR background stamp in my MISTI, and I am going to stamp over my background with white pigment ink. If you want your text background to not be as subtle, it's super subtle. I'm going to hold it up here to the camera so you can maybe see a little bit of that in the flowers and the petals of the flowers. If you want it to be a little bit more bold, you could always go with a different ink color, maybe something in pinks or even a lighter red. And it's going to give you a little bit more definition for that background. But I like the look of a text background, but I tend to gravitate towards it being a little bit lighter. You could also, if you're going to use a colorful ink, use second generation or even third generation stamping for a more distressed look. Next, I am taking the Simon Says stamp So Good dies, and I have die cut these from 2 shades of cardstock, 3 times each. The word So from a yellow cardstock. This is the Gina K Wild Dandelion cardstock. And then the pink is Hero Hues Azalea cardstock. And we're going to stack these one on top of another with liquid adhesive to give them a little dimension. And then that shadow for the So Good sentiment has been die cut from vellum. And we're simply going to adhere both of these to vellum. I really contemplated what color I wanted to do the shadow, and I have done this in some other videos recently, but if in question, I generally go with a vellum because I really still wanted to see as much of the background as possible, but I wanted to mute it a bit so that the sentiment really stands out against that busy background. I went with two-tone, completely drawing the colors for my sentiment from the flowers. And then for the little phrase that I'm going to stamp below, coming from the So Good stamp set, I have stamped this on some Hero Hues KIWI cardstock with a clear embossing ink and heat embossed with white embossing powder before die cutting into a banner with a Honeybee Stamps sentiment banner die. And again, all my cardstock color choices here were pulled directly from the colors in the background, or that I used for the background of my card. We're adhering the watercolored peony background to a white side fold card base, using a nice strong adhesive in case the watercolor paper has curled up a bit due to the water from the mini mister. Mine was not too bad, but I always like to use a nice strong adhesive. Then we're going to go ahead and adhere our sentiment that we've already stacked up and glued together and adhered to the vellum. We're going to adhere that to our card base, hiding the liquid adhesive behind the solid cardstock pieces, and adhere our sentiment banner to the design with some foam adhesive right there underneath the word good. It overlaps just a little bit there. I love the combination of a die cut greeting and then a little sentiment banner like that. We're going to finish with these spring sequins. These are from Simon Says Stamp, one of the new sequin mixes from the latest release for a little touch of sparkle. And then we're going to take a little Nuvo crystal drops in gloss white and add little teeny tiny drops to the centers of our sequins to finish them off. So these are just little bits. You definitely don't have to do this. You could add little gemstones, leave them as is. I like to just kind of finish with a little drop here and there, and that will finish off our card. Such a pretty effect that gives the look of watercolor without actual watercolor. Next, we're going to take some blue markers and color up the same stamped image. So this is very much similar to the first card, but I wanted to share the coloring process for the blue flowers now. I'm using 3 shades of the Tombow dual brush markers. We're using Glacier Blue, Reflex Blue, and Cyan. And I did go all over with Glacier Blue to start out with, and then I am kind of feathering in right on the stamp, the reflex blue and cyan colors, and then going back and blending a bit with glacier blue before spritzing with the mini mister and stamping on my cardstock. Again, going to work in small little areas. So I did the flower, I'm going to do the flower center, then I did the leaves, and this time I pulled in a little bit of the green color, pairing that with willow green and chartreuse, and I love the effect. So let's go ahead and spritz that and stamp that on our background, and that little touch of the green really adds a fun effect. Much like the first background, I'm going to work just with individual flowers one at a time to make it a little bit more controlled and easy. But you could color in everything, miss the whole thing, and go ahead and stamp that if you prefer. I kind of like watching it come together one little section at a time, so I like doing like kind of in quarters. I did that top flower, I'll do this bottom one, and then I'll do the two that are going to be over on the right side of the panel. Blending in those same colors and then taking my lightest color, that glacier blue, and just kind of blending those darker colors out to the very edge of the flower petal. And I'll go ahead and add the processed yellow to the center. We'll even do some of the leaves here. And I did forget to do one of those petals, which I'll go back and add a little bit of color to that here in a second. You're going to see that when I lift this up. If you press down and kind of let it sit there for a minute, it will often help the water kind of absorb into the cardstock. So that's why I usually leave it there for just a second before I lift the Misty cover back up. And then we're just going to stamp this again. This big flower probably takes the most work just because of the size. Then I'm going to wipe that clean and move on to the remaining two flowers. We're going to do all of the same steps that we did on the previous card. So we'll take the UR background stamp, stamp that with white pigment ink over the entire background to give a nice soft text background to this. I don't think it shows up quite as much on this card as it does on the pink, but it still gives that very subtle distressing in the background, which I really love. Again, you can get darker, you could use a blue color and do second or third generation stamping for a little bit more prominent text background if you want to. But play around with all kinds of different color combinations. Find your favorite color combinations. It's just a really great way to add those custom colors to an individual stamp, multiple colors to an individual stamp. I love direct to paper. Gonna do this last little tiny bud right up here, and then of course the remaining leaves for that little bit of greenery before we move on to the UR background stamp. The cardstock colors I'm using for the So Good dies for this are again going to be the Wild Dandelion Yellow from Gina K, and then we're going to use the Island Blue cardstock from Simon Says Stamp, which is my all-time favorite bright blue cardstock color. And then we'll do the sentiment strip with the Hero Hues KIWI cardstock. Here's that UR background stamp, adding just a little distressing. I did go ahead and stamp it twice. I did that for the pink background, floral background as well. And then we're going to assemble the greeting. I did that off camera. We're going to adhere that right to our card, kind of in the lower right corner, just like we did before. Finish with a scattering of those spring sequins from Simon Says Stamp. I'm using an embellishment wand to easily pick these up and pop them right in place where I've added little dabs of glue. And then I will go ahead and take the Nuvo Crystal Drops in Gloss White and add that to the center. Now I got a little bit too much on this sequin, so I went ahead and took some tweezers and picked it up and discarded it, and I'll just put another sequin in its place. I wanted to share that since I was working quickly, the glue had not dried, and I was easily able to remove that sequin. That's kind of how I fixed that little blunder. And then I want to make sure and let the Nuvo crystal drops completely dry, and my cards are all finished. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for these 2 faux watercolor cards created with markers. The supplies I used to create my cards are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more videos featuring Simon Says stamps and dies that you might be interested in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell to never miss a new card making video. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.